It's always a good day when I get to talk about Myst. After all, I am something of a fan, but I'm pretty sure you know that by now, and if you don't, then you must be new here. Ever since properly revisiting this series back in 2020, it's become pretty clear to me how Myst was one of the formative game experiences of my young life, and continues to shape how I approach and consider the world around me to this day. It rekindled a passion for environmental exploration and puzzle games that I think I've always had, but didn't know how to contextualize until I was a little older and maybe had some perspective going for me. There's a playlist here of all the paths this series and the genre it established has taken me down over the last half decade, which is to say nothing of all of the times referring back to this series has been helpful in other measures. Myst and Riven are two really valuable texts for me at this point, and I'll take any chance I can get to talk about them, which brings us to today. Because confession time. It occurs to me that in the context of the wider series, I am something of a Fairweather fan, having really only properly absorbed the first two games and the first novel. I've even said on the record that I never completed Riven until the 2018 re-release made it available and functional on modern machines. For as much as I love those opening chapters of the franchise, it really does feel like I should finally see the series through to the end and finally fully understand where it went when it left the hands of its creators and no doubt took on new life. Myst is something that just about anyone in or around games can recognize. The iconography was at one point ubiquitous. Let's not forget Simpsons. And most people, at least my age or around there, will express recognition even if it's just as the game they should play one day, or was popular when my dad was getting into computers. The impression I get, though, is that most people understand the later sequels to be akin to all of those other Land Before Time movies you never watched, and if you, good viewer, are too young for that reference, let me know in the comments what I should have gone with so that I can learn something today. And that's only if people even realize there are sequels to Myst at all. Fodder for bargain bins, people might have called them back when PC games were still physical, and maybe at best a shadow of the original gesturing towards what once was. Case in point, Myst 3 Exile marks the moment that the franchise leaves the nest of developer Cyan. Presto Studios, with Ubisoft and Cyan tag-teaming as publisher, was selected to guide the third installment of the series, while Cyan dove headfirst into development of Real Myst, an updated and enhanced version of the original game, and Uru, an attempt by Cyan to bring the story of Myst and the Dunny to the MMO space, for better or worse. Yeah, that was dumb, sorry. But none of this was really on my mind back in 2001. I was excited for Exile when it was on the horizon. There was no way I couldn't be. Myst was one of the first wider mythologies and fictional histories I got really into as a kid. Some of you might be wondering how much history and story there could be backing up a game that is essentially about three people stuck in a room together, but I need to emphasize, you can't get an idea of even half of what's out there with just the games. Even looking around the early internet, I didn't find my way into even the most exhaustive places where the big stuff got elaborated on, and believe me, there's enough here to make J.R.R. Tolkien blush. But I found the games enchanting enough on their own. I was so taken in by just the worlds they offered, the science of linking books, the stories of these characters. This was the world I wanted to live in when I was younger. Obviously, I had every intention of playing Exile when it came out, but games came to me slowly back then. The machinery necessary wasn't as universal as it is now, and attentions were wild. Lots to do, school to go to, crushes to freak out about, homework to do, and extracurricular activities to extracurriculate. So while I did play Exile, I never finished it. I was young, I lacked focus and dedication of cause, much like I do today. I clashed with this game as best I could, but eventually flamed out on it. The game remained incomplete for me for all of this time until I finally sat down and absorbed it all in pretty much one sitting late last year. I've always had a fairly cloudy memory of what the game entailed, but since I took my first steps into Jinanen all those years ago, a lot has changed. I have developed new perspectives and appreciations. I've specifically spent a lot of time thinking about the game's predecessors, and the ways in which I tend to engage with the medium of video games have evolved in and of themselves. I mean, this channel you're watching right now is a pretty big one out the gate. The prospect of this kind of exploration is an enticing thought at this point, and so this project quickly became something of a foregone conclusion. What do I think of Myst 3 Exile? Well, I'll just get this out of the way now. No disrespect to the people at Presto Studios, but to my mind, Exile doesn't do anything in particular to advance the form or genre. That is probably not what you're expecting when you see me show up with a new video on a puzzle game, especially one with the word Myst in its title. These kinds of games tend to send me to some pretty strange places. I'm not beyond spinning a bit of yarn to explain just what appeals to me about this genre, and what I think these games are capable of turning back on the audience. Some of you, though, are probably waving your hands around, desperately trying to get my attention, eager to tell me all about how Exile was the first game in the series to include full motion view of environments. No longer are we bound to single frame views of the tableaus in front of us. Now we can move the mouse, and we can just look around. It's pretty cool, and yeah, it looks incredible, but I am hard-pressed to think of an instance in this game where it specifically assists or enhances what the game is capable of. It's an incredible technical leap forward, and obviously is where this kind of game should be headed, but to my mind, it's a neat addition rather than new ground to explore, at least the way it's used here. Apart from this, what I found in Exile instead was a game that was true to its storyline and history, pushing the boundaries of its own message. I think Exile does do a lot for the Myst series, one of my favorite continuing stories in the world of games, and that's more where this video is coming from. This is a I really like the Myst games video, rather than something like Exile destroyed my perception of how the human brain operates emotionally with puzzles somehow. Yeah, we're still a ways off from another one of those. It's worth pointing out, though, that Exile has always been a topic hovering around the to-do list, as this game has lived in my mind as a land of contrast and mystery. It harkens back to the classic formula utilized in Myst, a central world that links out to 3 additional locations, what are known in the series as ages, that are packed with places for you to explore, story to find, and most importantly, puzzles and mysteries for you to solve. It's a classic formula for a reason, and I don't blame the development team for not attempting something like Riven again. After all, Riven is maybe the biggest gamble I know of in game design. The idea of creating another single, sprawling, self-contained place like that, which not only is a high watermark for environmental storytelling, but is also the driving force of world building that hosts a story and weaves conceptual load-bearing puzzles so seamlessly into it, is an anxiety dream-breaking containment in real time. See my videos on Riven for more on that. It's amazing to see completed, but it is hours of wandering around aimlessly hoping that revelation falls on you at some point for progress to occur. I don't think there's any arguing that Myst's original structure is more immediately dynamic when all is said and done, with its varied environments, clearer signposting of elements, and the chance to examine a breadth of ideas rather than an immense but focused scope. The question on my mind since my first dalliances with this game have always been whether or not Exile would capitalize on what the series had put forward in totality, and so I was eager to finally put to rest my impressions and wonderment on this topic, as Exile, up until this point, consisted of an age that I love, an age that I didn't care for, and an age that I never even attempted. Perhaps it is time to put this unknowing to rest. I had remembered how it played out, but the drama of the opening of this game was still a bit of a shock. After reuniting with Atris and Catherine sometime after the events of Riven, it seems like it has at least been years, Atris is excited to show you the new age he has just finished writing, called Relishon, which he plans to offer as a new home for the Dunny people. And just as a side note here, it is nice to see Atris still being played by Robyn Miller, who, if you're not familiar, along with his brother Robyn, co-founded Cyan and co-developed Myst and Riven, the two of them even performing the parts of characters in the series. And here is Rand Miller reprising his role as Atris, essentially the main character of the franchise, even though neither he nor his studio were involved in the development of the game. Mad respect to the dedication, especially at a time when video games didn't demand or even expect this kind of continuing performance for its characters. Case in point, we didn't keep the same Catherine from Riven, but so it is, I suppose. After some time left to ourselves, wandering around Atris' study, trying out this fancy new full range of vision and looking around we get now, reading his journal as you do, and checking out the ruined Riven book, which is a nice touch, Atris eventually joins us and declares that it's time to depart for our trip to Relishon. But before we can collect ourselves, all of a sudden, Brad Dourif from the Lord of the Rings trilogy and Exorcist 3 suddenly appears. He steals the Relishon book and sets fire to Atris' study, escaping into a linking book that falls to the floor surrounded by flames. But seriously, yeah, that is actually Brad Dourif. Without a second thought, we follow this mysterious madman, transporting ourselves to who knows where this book will take us, and give chase through this baffling new place. The thief clearly knows where he's going, and is one step ahead of us at every turn, sealing himself in a tower at the center of this strange new age, where we can only look on helplessly, wondering what to do next. Yeah, it certainly doesn't carry the same elegance as the openings of Myst or Riven. Each of the masterclasses on how to hook you into a story and situation pretty much with words and mystery alone.
For reasons you'll discover, I can't send you to Riven with a way out.
Still such a good line. It is worth remembering, though, that both of those games begin with a conflict in progress, and you are kind of sliding in from the side and getting involved after the fact. Part of the mystifying magic, see what I did there, is finding out what exactly is going on in the first place. Exile, on the other hand, begins with the setup of a new problem to solve. It makes sense even if the action is a bit jarring for this series. What once was the tranquil sloshing of tides on an island-side dock is now a dramatic foot chase in a Myst game. Yeah, it's probably not what you're expecting as a returning fan. And thus the game begins. No way out, no way to signal for help. It's just you and the world around you until you can figure out how to confront this madman in the tower. After wandering around a bit, reading the journal Atris gave you, being menaced at by Grima Wormtongue from behind a window, and most of all, some puzzle solving, you will find your way into the tower, but of course, you are only just too late. We enter the locked chamber just in time to watch as the thief links away from this world, leaving us with a message.
Hello, Atris. Been a long time. Sorry I'm not there to greet you in person, but I just didn't think it would be wise, considering how long I've been stuck here.
And so it is a tale of revenge. Savidro, as we eventually learn his name to be, is a victim of the pillaging and plundering perpetrated by none other than Cirrus and Akinar, Atris' wayward sons, who we had the displeasure of meeting in the first game, upon his homeworld of Narayan. After losing his wife and daughters to the chaos and violence created by the brothers, Savidro found himself stranded here in the world of Jananin, where he began piecing together how the world and the books worked and assembling his designs for revenge. We just happened to appear on the day the trap was sprung. And trapped we are, here in yet another strange new world to explore and understand. I mean, don't tempt me with a good time, Savidro. And Jananin is a functional starting point. It is very much a puzzle box akin to Myst Island. Rather than the protective vault that Myst Island turns out to be, Jananin is, for all intents and purposes, a mental obstacle course. According to Atris' journal, it was a major inspiration for Relishon, and we will later find out that it was originally designed to be a learning course for Atris' sons, Cirrus and Akinar.
This world is the first step on your journey.
The look and feel of the place hews closest to Riven, with its high rock formations, sandy walkways, and deep valleys. Though if I am to offer criticisms up front, while it looks like it could be an island in Riven, it definitely doesn't carry the same level of depth, and it also greatly lacks the intrigue and fascination of what you will see in Myst. And this is something that I'm a little bit stuck on here in this moment. I'll be honest, something that I'm trepidatious of while exploring further into the Myst games is what I expect to be a lack of whimsy or the charmingly nonsensical that got this series off to such a fantastic start. Myst is a game that inspires curiosity. Everywhere you go on that little island, there was a new element just enough out of place that you instinctively, if you have good instincts that is, will want to investigate and figure out the purpose of. There's nothing about Jananan that makes me think I'm gonna come across a log cabin or a planetarium or a rocket ship anywhere here. It's all almost too cohesive and looks a lot like a place in which you would set a video game. And yes, Riven was also very much in this same school of design. You're not going to be coming across any log cabins in that game either, but Jananan is not trying to be a place where people built their homes or even really be a place that needs to tell a story. It is essentially a classroom, a hub between places. It serves the same purpose as Myst Island, and so the fact that it looks like a place I might stumble into playing any other game is a little bit deflating. The closest thing we have to a log cabin here looks like a house right out of Rivendell in the Lord of the Rings movies. I look forward to a game like this so I can explore strange new places that excite the imagination, that are unlike what I can expect to find elsewhere, and I'm kinda wondering if we'll see any log cabins in Revelation, End of Ages, or Uru. I know, I'm really stuck on log cabins for some reason, but it is a good marker of what I think you can do in a game like this, specifically in this series. You don't have to normalize as time goes on. Case in point, Abduction, Cyan's 2016 game, geez, that was 10 years ago already, fully embraces the exact kind of strange whimsy that I'm getting at here, and even manages to explain how the world came to look like that within the story and mechanics of the game. I won't say how, because you should play it and find out for yourself, but it's proof that this kind of a wacky aesthetic can still work even 10 years ago, apparently. There's plenty of metaphorical log cabins in that game. Working your way through Jananan is simple enough in procedure. There are essentially 5 puzzles for you to solve here, and really only one of them reaches beyond its little corner of the world to make use of the wider space. I wish I could spend more time on these, but the truth is there isn't much to talk about, and I'm hesitant to use too much footage of them for fear of just giving the solutions away. In fact, I would go so far as to say that the most engaging puzzle Jananan has to offer is the one you need to solve to confront Savidro in the first place. I'll say it now, once you have unlocked the other ages, Jananan really ceases to serve a purpose. So yeah, that big tower on the cover art, which I will admit does a pretty good job of being an iconic image to build a game around, doesn't really end up being very much of it. While Myst Island gave you plenty to do, and even had secrets of its own hiding in the margins, Jananan fades quickly into the background in the presence of its 3 radial ages. Amateria, an island of mechanisms and strange architecture, Idana, a world of nature, plants, and wildlife, and Voltaic, a massive power plant that has fallen into disrepair. Each of these ages is a well-constructed little puzzle box unto themselves. They are larger and have more to do in them than Jananan, and more so even than the separate ages of Myst. Their construction is largely point-to-point puzzle solving, manipulating elements in one place will create reactions elsewhere, and you can follow these associations until you reach your end goal, finding a specific symbol hidden at the end. It's worth pointing out that even though I had played through 2 of these ages before now, all those years ago, all 3 of these had me stumped in their own ways. Even with the basic principles in place for 2 of them, the specific puzzles of each of them will get your wheels turning and really engage how all of this fits together. Now I know what you're all probably thinking, which one is the age you disliked? You said earlier that you liked one of them, hated one of them, and didn't even try the third, and now we're demanding answers! And to that, my adoring public, I would respond, first, that is an oversimplification of what I said, thank you very much, and second is that it's Idana. Yeah, there's no way to ease into that. I really did not vibe with the nature-based age back then, and I found that to still be true today. Conceptually, I think it's awesome. It's gorgeous to look at. You didn't get anything quite like this in Myst or Riven before now, and a nature-based world is definitely a concept worth exploring in this sense. My complaints are, though, that the puzzle of this area is in a complete straight line, rarely deviating from the path that you can't really help but be on the whole time, and when things do head in a different direction by the end, it's hard to draw on the mechanical rules set out up to this point. And they kind of make me wonder, are these results repeatable? Like, a huge part of this puzzle progression is a bird getting stuck in a carnivorous plant structure, and then you rescue it, and I think Savidro made that plant, but I'm not sure. And then there's these little almost rabbit guys being around enough to influence the plant life to make changes for you. Like, I don't know. What if the bird has learned from last time and doesn't get stuck? What do you do then? It's also supposed to carry you to the end of the age, and what if it's just not around when you're trying to get the symbol from Madonna? Also, the directions and places you can go aren't really signposted all that well because of the naturalism of the environment around you. Things don't look like paths or passages, and in fact, the only time I had to bust open a guide to get myself unstuck in this playthrough was because this tunnel really wasn't forthcoming enough with all of the places you can go within it, and I wound up going in circles for a good long while before I realized I can just click out here. So yeah, pro tip for if you get stuck in Adana. I don't know, I'm nitpicking, and this is very quickly turning into a review, I get that, but it raises more questions than I'd like for a game experience like this, especially when this is in direct contrast to both Voltaic and Amateria in this very game. Like, you don't even know how in contrast it is to both of those. It is so in contrast. Hilariously, I am actually not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about Voltaic, though, because while I think it's a good puzzle age with lots of detail and interesting thematic and mechanical interactions within its systems, it's also kind of the most middle-of-the-road chunk of this game. As I described before, it is essentially a massive power plant that has fallen into disrepair, and that is the task of this age, resetting all of the equipment and figuring out how to direct the power to the places you need it to facilitate your travel and the functioning of the machinery. Yeah, this was the age I hadn't played before now, and if I'm honest, this is probably the one that fits in most with what I would expect from this kind of game. If I had to swap in one of these ages into the original game of Myst, you could probably get Voltaic in there and nothing would be that out of place. I do think that here in Exile, it's the most difficult of the ages and probably the grandest in terms of its scope, but it kind of came and went of its own accord, didn't really stick with me afterwards, and a big part of this discussion needs to be centered around whether or not that is the fault of the Amateria age or not, because yeah, Amateria is the age that I loved from all those years ago, and is the reason I decided to include a section on the specific ages in this video, because playing it again reinforced those feelings in a big way. Yeah, Amateria absolutely rules, just on looks alone. It is covered in exotic architecture and all kinds of structures that are just begging to be deciphered and put to use. Everywhere you look is a rock formation or pathway so perfectly melded into the environment and the passages of this area. It's just so satisfying to see and take in. It gets even better when you do actually start digging into the mechanisms of this age and it becomes apparent that, oh gosh, these are just giant marble runs, and you're basically just troubleshooting them until they work properly. But wait a minute, why are these walkways all concave and semicircular everywhere I go? Is this whole dang thing a giant marble run? Good viewer, it most certainly is, and I can't describe to you how excited I was to get to the top of the central tower and watch it all work in tandem all the way back in my child times, but I'm pleased to say that it gets even better, because when you do get up to the top of that tower, you will discover in a hurry that the final phase of this operation is you riding the marble run. And oh, I really wanted to show you how this all plays out here on the channel, but I should probably leave some mystery for you to discover on your own, right? So yeah, Amateria has a gimmick, but oh, what a gimmick it is. I was a little nervous coming back to this age after so long, wondering if it would shine as brightly as it did for me decades ago, and at this point, it's not just shining as bright, it's kind of raising the weighted average of this game as a whole in my mind. And I acknowledge, by my own metrics, I'm not quite sure how much this fits into my vision for what I would want in a Myst sequel. This kind of a reach almost feels anti-Mystian, if you will, but even aside from where the wider premise leads to, the design of Amateria as a collective piece does carry the kind of energy I would want from an age of Myst. Phases of the larger puzzle requiring pieces from all of the working points, careful consideration of the design of the world so that it makes mechanical sense, and you have to consider every piece of it before continuing. It feels like the kind of tuned and precise design I desire in this kind of game environment, so maybe, instead, it's the most Myst that Myst has ever been. Yeah. Think about it. Now, I did describe these ages as puzzle boxes, and that phrasing was pretty intentional. All three of these places more or less echo Jananin in their tone. None of them feel like worlds that carry a story of any significance. As much as it's kind of over-discussed these days, there's no environmental storytelling to speak of in any of these places. You know, the main thing that a Myst game should have. What can you learn by being here and interacting with things? What can you piece together about where you are and what is happening? Myst did this wonderfully, within the confines of its scope at least, showing you how the brothers Cirrus and Akinar afflicted themselves upon the worlds they encountered, how they fought amongst each other, really laying the narrative framework for the game overall. You could read Atris's journals about how he arrived in these places and how they developed over time. Riven is just rotten with stuff to examine and learn about. Environmental storytelling was the entire point of that game, really, when you got right down to it. But Exile's ages don't seem to have anything worth conveying to the player other than the puzzles at hand. Like Jananin, they are lessons to be taught, not stories to be told, which, you know what? That's fine. That is what these environments were originally designed for in the fiction of the game, so it makes sense that the story would be conveyed by other means, even if it results in a wider game experience that is... It's fine. It's fine. And those other means are pretty exclusively video messages from Savidro that were apparently originally messages from Atris to his sons, encouraging them as they made their way through the lessons. Yeah, big Dr. Venture's learning beds energy, if you ask me.
Congratulations, Hank and Dean.
You can also find pages from Savidro's journal throughout your travels to get the whole picture of what happened to him, how he himself deciphered everything going on in these worlds, and how he hopes to carry out his revenge. In order to access the linking book to Narayan, which was apparently the ultimate goal of these lessons in the first place, you need to go and find 3 symbols, one from each of the ages around Jananin, and feed them into an image reader. I personally am a little disappointed that you don't get to enter the images yourself somehow, like with some sort of user-controlled input or something like that. You do have to collect them like items, so you can't just jump ahead to the endgame if you know what you're doing, like in previous Myst games. But all the same, it's kind of a cool concept that does come full circle later. Savidro has reprogrammed the image reader,
So if you want to reclaim relation, you're going to have to take your own class.
we just got caught in the machinery instead. That is kind of the long and short of it, and all things considered, it doesn't seem like much has been altered. We spend the game traveling through the ages of Jananin, where along the way we get shouted at by pre-taped promos from the Jumbotron intended for Atris, hyping up their steel cage match at Revolution only on pay-per-view or something. And we are forced to look upon the murals. Yeah, these murals. The salt in the wound of this particular revenge. Yeah, get 'em, Savvy. So I guess I should correct myself here because, okay, there is some environmental storytelling, but I didn't mention it before because it's very specifically about one thing, and that thing is not about the places you are in. In each of the ages, you can find these murals painted by Savidro depicting the progression of just how Cirrus and Akinar destroyed the peace and prosperity of Narayan, leading to its collapse and destruction. I mean, I guess as part of the overarching story, they are important in that sense. It's not what you'd call subtle, but it's also not really as in-your-face as you might hope. I even almost missed one of them just because I didn't look at the wall it was on until I was almost done in the area. Honestly, kind of an argument against the free look mechanic here. With enough diligence, you will reach Narayan, the finish line of this gauntlet of the mind, where you finally come face to face with the man himself, and the fate of Relishan is decided. I kind of got a laugh, though, out of how when you get there, he's just kind of hanging out in this house. And then he comes out for a bit just to basically go, wait, you're not Atris? Get the hell off my lawn. And then literally just goes back inside and waits for you to do something. And that something is solve an actually pretty ambitious final puzzle, tying together the significance of the images, the writings provided to you by Atris, and the world building of Narayan. It's maybe not as elaborate as it could have been, but of all of the tasks set for you in this game, I think I spent the longest on this one, parsing through the information I had and figuring out how to apply it in the way I needed to. It is probably the excursion that will demand the most of your deductive reasoning, and was kind of a high note to finish this game on, even if it's the kind of thing that will probably turn away a good number of casual players. When you do get everything solved and in place, Savidro finally admits that maybe the two of you can help each other, because as it turns out, the fate of Narayan may not be as cut and dry as we had previously believed. How you conduct yourself in this moment is the primary determiner of the ending you will receive. So that is the up and down of my feelings on Exile, a game that had the impossible task of following what I consider to be two of the best games ever made. Myst was, after all, a history-making progenitor, creating a formula that stimulated the greater experience of it in fantastic new ways and inspiring imitators the world over through the decades. And Riven was the touchdown run that made it all count, taking everything that made Myst new and exciting and offering it apotheosis, elevating it into something new and powerful. Yeah, good luck with that third game there, Presto. But even if the puzzles and execution of the game are not what they once were, I have a deep admiration for how Presto Studios handled the continuing of the story. I would be terrified of a new studio not understanding what works about the conflict in the first two games, and it almost feels like that's happening initially. I'll point it out again, a Myst game that kicks off with arson and a foot chase. Yeah, it's a bit dissonant. It kind of feels like we might be headed for the sequel that forgot its roots here. I'm half expecting Atris to turn into some sort of badass, single-handedly solving problems by knocking heads with like Jedi master powers that he'll have developed or something. Doesn't help that he basically dresses like Ben Kenobi most of the time. Exile thankfully remains a game of words, and amazingly we aren't even aiming for some new conflict to worry about, which they could have just as easily gone with. The mythology and history behind Myst is truly massive, but I have always thought that one of the main selling points of the series was how simple and straightforward the stories of the individual games actually end up being. Myst begins and ends with the story of Atris and his sons. Riven is all about trying to get Catherine out of Gen's clutches before the world collapses. There's no mention of all the wars, the rebellions, or the endless character histories of the wikis. That is all there if you want to go seek it out, and I've never played Uru, maybe it's all in there, but Exile, for all of its tone shifts, maintains its simplicity. A ghost of Cirrus and Akenar's wild and horrendous gap year abroad has reappeared and is reaping its vengeance. A bleak reminder of the sins of the past and the reality we find ourselves in because of them. It is the further rippling after effects of exactly what set the whole series in motion. A further condemnation of the evils that so often arise when new worlds are encroached upon. And I do have to commend this game, which may not reach out and so gloriously infest the genre from which it springs, but does tie its puzzles, its worlds, and its story back to a central philosophy. The lessons that Atris set out for his sons, which are kind of profound. If we are to be set upon the world and the people we find there, we need to understand the importance of this, to see it as responsibility. This game is adamant in its message. Every place you can conceive of has a science, a history, and a culture, and to forget these things is to sow your own downfall and the destruction of everything around you. Yeah, the Myst franchise, condemning colonialism since 1993. The concept of the Myst series is itself a fascinating venture that the games indeed wrestle with from the very beginning. The idea of creating books that physically transport you to new worlds sounds like a nice and simple fairy tale concept, but it runs into questions that need to be asked once you find people living in the world which you, by all appearances, seem to have created. This is not a problem that the series shies away from either. When you stop and think about how the art, which is the general practice of creating linking books, must work, it's kind of headbending. The science of linking to ages is so specific and nuanced in the mythology of the games that most of the discussions I could find online talking it through agree that it's probably this, or that, and likely a bit of both. Whatever it is essentially the crux of the whole series. The wider metatext of the games make it clear that ages are not created, but are essentially found by the books that link to them, their histories and peoples intact and independent of your act of connecting to them. Atris makes it clear in several of his writings that he does not view this act as creation, and anticipates this kind of contact as a learning experience, an opportunity to enrich rather than exploit. Again, Atris's despotic father, who we matched wits with in Riven, refutes this outlook. Whether he understands this principle or not, elects to use his powers to impose himself on these new peoples he finds as the capital G god of their worlds. I think Exile does a good job at posing a dire question. How do you maintain your humanity in the face of an immense and powerful inheritance that is, just by happenstance, your birthright? How do you impart godly powers unto your children responsibly? That's quite a head-scratcher, if you ask me. I have no idea how to tackle that problem, and I even watched all of Succession. I hope it at least goes better when it comes time for Atris and Catherine to show Yisha how all of this works. This is a conflict that begins in Myst and is followed up on here in Exile. Sirius and Achenar must have been made aware of this in their learnings. Exile is made up of the lessons Atris was teaching them, and yet, based on everything we find in Myst and the revelations brought to us by Savidro, it's clear that, created or not, the brothers saw these ages as plunder rather than places, and peasants rather than people. How tragic it is that these visitors became invaders, poisoned by their own sense of power. And how poisonous this well has become. Of the 5 characters we deal with directly in the first 2 games, 3 are murderous plunderers who envision themselves as spiteful god figures. Atris and Catherine apparently are the only 2 people who have any kind of hope for the well-being of anyone other than themselves. Even the new guy in this game isn't much better, and I understand that Savidro is doing a John Wick right now. He was wronged. He lost his wife and kids to Sirius and Achenar's cruelty and disregard for human life. So driven he is by this hatred that when he realizes that Narayan still lives, that there is hope for his home still, it almost destroys him. Polluted as he is with suspicion and anger, he is justified in getting revenge, if you will, but 2 of this game's 5 endings end with him killing you, despite him needing you alive to achieve his goals, apparently doing so just because he now has the option. And a third has him sending you off empty-handed, specifically after you held up your end of the deal and showed him mercy. His response to an olive branch is to set it on fire because that's all he knows. You only win in this situation if you can get leverage on him. How do you break this cycle? And it's worth pointing out that Atris's whole motivation at this time is to help his ancestral people rebuild their home, only for expeditions to their former homeland to reveal a history so tragic and corrupt that he just says screw it and writes them a new age to live in instead. One that he only hopes will inspire them to live in balance and figure out how to be better than last time. How does Atris reckon with all of this circling around him? How do you not let power corrupt you when it seems to have corrupted everyone else? Exile is a game that I haven't really approached since I was barely a teenager. At that point in my life, as with so many things, the experience of the game existed more or less in a vacuum. It was more of the same, puzzles to solve and a bad guy to outsmart. I didn't have a lot of space in the brain for things like motivations, the effect of art on the mind, or even just what it means to build the conflict of a story this way. Exile plays as very much a by-the-numbers sequel to Myst, another game which existed in a vacuum for me for a long time. Now, though, on the other side of most of my life so far, I see Exile as the thematic victory that it is, even if it's not the experience I think it needs to be. The game is about the fallout surrounding a fundamental failing of the human spirit, but the game's biggest missed opportunity was not driving home this statement in the granular. We hear these failures spoken of in the writing of the game. We get the murals that Savidro creates depicting what Sirius and Achenar did. But as for the ideas of systems and cultures, the methods by which we commune with others and the world around us, we only see them play out in terms of success. and not how we fail at understanding them. There is a disconnect between Exile and its wider series, having us work our way through largely pristine environments and carefully calibrated systems, not what we might have in mind for places that were set upon by an unsupervised Cirrus and Achenar, based on what we know of them anyways. For a long time in my mind, Myst was a series that had ended after 2 entries. The culminating moments of Riven are the perfect send-off for a story that begins in nothing more than unformed darkness, nowhere to turn to but towards a world that invites you to learn its story and what it means to understand a place and people within it. Exile asks you to begin this story again, and though it has you retreading familiar ground in many ways, I found more to consider here than I remembered from my younger days. The new hands that held the Myst series clearly cared about what they had been given, and thus considering the series beyond Riven has gotten easier for me. Exile can't hope to live up to what Myst and Riven set out for the world at large, and nor should it. Expecting every attempt at creativity to be some new elevation of form and function is setting yourself up for just a miserable existence, if you ask me. Exile is proof that the story of this series can stand on its own, that it has as much to say as the construction and design of its worlds. For as much as Presto Studios may not have shattered expectations and turned the idea of a puzzle game on its head for the 3rd go-around, Exile has found a new champion in me just for what it is. Presto's involvement in the series would come to an end after Exile, after some behind-the-scenes business stuff that I definitely wasn't thinking about back in the 2000s. The rights to the Myst franchise would land squarely in the hands of Ubisoft directly. And what do you know? Guess who would end up being the studio to shape the next game in the series? 2004's Myst 4 Revelation, a game that I have never played and know virtually nothing about. Will the 4th adventure in the worlds of Myst live up to its name? Well, finding out just how revelatory it truly was is an adventure we'll have to take next time.